And today's talk is going to be from Susan Sons and Von Welch from Indiana University, and they are going to be talking about two different projects in the cybersecurity space, the Trusted CI effort and the ResearchSOC. And I will turn it over to Von and Susan to get started.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. How's my audio?
Perfect, loud and clear.
Great. So, hello everyone, and thanks for spending a little bit of time with us on this Friday, and thank you to Jason for the invitation to talk. I'm Von Welch from Indiana University. I'm speaking to you today in my role as Director for Trusted CI, and Susan Sons is going to be speaking. We're going to intermix our two talks. Susan, do you want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Susan Sons. I'm Chief Security Analyst at CACR, and I'm speaking today in my role as Deputy Director on ResearchSOC.
So Susan and I are going to be covering the two different projects today. They're both similar in that they're National Science Foundation funded cybersecurity resource centers for the community. So these are centers that serve the cyber infrastructure community in helping them secure their resources. The two centers do have very different flavors. ResearchSOC, which is the relatively newer one that Susan is going to talk about, relatively nascent and very much focused on operational cybersecurity services, as she's going to describe. Trusted CI has now been around for about almost 7 years, and it's very much focused on leadership and helping you generate cybersecurity programs holistically. So tackling things like governance, budgeting, policies, right? So a lot of just basically having the program of the structure together. I'm going to start first by backing up a little bit as to why do we have NSF cybersecurity centers, right? What's different about cybersecurity for open science that merits these cybersecurity centers existing, as opposed to, you can do a quick Google search and find, unbounded amounts of cybersecurity advice out there. So first I want to clarify, when you talk research in cybersecurity, there's a little bit of a bifurcation. And probably until recently, most of the time, if you walked into an information security office, folk on campus like a CISO, and you talked cybersecurity and research, it probably went right to personal medical records and HIPAA, and and that's where the conversation lies. So there's been a fair amount of attention to research with what we loosely call regulated data, right? This alphabet soup of things you see up there on the slide, HIPAA, FISMA, etc. What we're really talking about here, and if you look across NSF's portfolio, you see a lot of science that doesn't fall under the regulated data. Astronomy, climate science, physics, et cetera, that all still has, as I will give examples of, significant cybersecurity concerns, but it doesn't fall under a off-the-shelf program. And I just always like to point out, particularly if you're at a university that doesn't have a medical school, this sort of science is the majority of the science that is probably going on your campus, and really Trusted CI focuses on that open science, and so this talk is going to follow that focus. So first, I like to tackle one myth and clarify a misconception that you often see about cybersecurity, because if you read the papers, most of the headlines that you see related to cybersecurity involve data breaches, and so it's private information that is getting stolen or exposed. And so we have a tendency in society to conflate confidentiality and cybersecurity. And then hence, well, we're doing open science, all our data is open, so we don't need confidentiality, so we don't need cybersecurity. So I'm going to want to take this one head on and hopefully convince you that cybersecurity brings a lot to open science, even if it doesn't have confidentiality needs. We like to think about cybersecurity for open science breaking down into these three areas, productivity, trustworthiness, and reproducibility. And I'm going to walk through these three in turn. So productivity is a fairly easy one to visualize. Most of the scientific instruments that we're using today are connected to computers and rely on computers to make them work. You know, either we're talking about for access or data management, or sometimes, you know, you've literally got a computer hardwired to an instrument for its control. And so if you've got a cybersecurity incident that happens to coincide with, you know, a natural event, as is the case of this article here with astronomers in Australia, you know, having to deal with a cyber attack while there's a neutron stars colliding, you know, you've got a problem there because of the availability of that instrument. Another example I'd like to point out is some of you may have heard of ransomware, and it's a form of malware, and I'm not going to get into the technical details. The thing that it really did, though, that was had some really bad consequences across really across society, hospitals are feeling it really badly, is it encrypts your data and then wants to sell it back to you. So it effectively holds it for ransom. And so this is a particular challenge because what it means is scientific data can fall into this. And then we also have a challenge that cyber infrastructure is just more diverse. And so we've got the case where effective cybersecurity that works well in an office environment doesn't work well for high performance computing, high performance networking, and whatnot. And then we also have the challenge in science projects that we do a lot of collaborations, even internationally and even globally. Because we're, you know, time bounded with grants, these are often short-lived. They're also research managed teams. So if we think about what exists in our university databases in terms of departments or whatnot, research projects, you know, go beyond those things to different departments, different schools, and whatnot. So Susan, I realized I actually talked past our transition point. I apologize for that. How about I hand the baton to you now a little bit belatedly?
Sure. So in addition to being productive, science needs to be trustworthy. That means that we need to be able to have some faith in the results that we get and the process by which we got them. Next slide, please. That means that we're really focused on scientific integrity, and that starts with data integrity and understanding what's happened to our data. When we talk to the finance sector or the regulated data folks or most of corporate America, they're really focusing their cybersecurity on confidentiality, but we care more about integrity. Next slide. We may have ethical concerns around confidentiality. For example, a couple of research projects working with endangered species, but these are really edge cases for us. Slide. Even in the case of pre-publication data, that is not so much confidentiality as temporary confidentiality. We don't want things to get out early. It's not that we need them to remain secret for the next 4 generations. Slide. What we really care about is reputational harm. People stop having faith in science if they don't know if the data has been tampered with. People stop having faith in science if they don't know if the process that data has gone through to get from here to a conclusion has been tampered with. Slide. This leads me to the last goal we're going to talk about, which is reproducibility. The ability to do actual scientific reproducibility on the science that we've done. Can we rerun this process and get the same results? Slide. There is a lot to be said for doing reproducibility studies, and more have been done lately with mixed results on which science was actually done as well as we thought it was and what can't be reproduced. And often we're finding that there's a need for more transparency and rigor, and some of that comes in the technology we used, because if you don't really know which data set was used, or if you don't really know which version of a piece of software was run on the data to get the results, you can't really reproduce the experiment as it was run in the first place. Slide. And then there's the issue of running science on a hacked computer. What happens if something on a machine has been compromised? Can we trust science that's been done here? Slide. When we're looking at a reproducibility agenda for cybersecurity, what we're really focusing on, what is the real impact of unauthorized access and errors? Is this going to change the scientific outcome, or is it just a hassle for the people maintaining the infrastructure? Are we getting our patching done? And do we know what we've patched and when? Are we taking care of confidential data and software? And what are the cost trade-offs? Are we still supporting the science mission, or are we getting lost in a rabbit hole? Slide. So our talk is about balancing science against risk. Why cybersecurity for open science? You've gotten a lot from that already. We're going to talk about what's unusual about cybersecurity for open science, because we've teased that a little, but it really is a different animal. We're going to talk about the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence and what it can do for you. That's Von's part. And then I'll be talking about the Research Security Operations Center. Slide. And at this point, I hand it back to Von.
Thank you, Susan. So I'm going to go into the first of the two projects now, and this is Trusted CI, which has been the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence now for over 3 years. It's a virtual distributed center with the partners you see there on the screen, and it's got the mission, which is written there on the left. And I won't read it to you verbatim, but the main thing to take away from it is that it is a combination of leading the community and understanding cybersecurity for science, and then supporting the community in implementing good cybersecurity practices. And the key thing that I like to make sure people understand is, unlike some of the software institutes that are out there, it doesn't produce technology per se, not software or widgets. It helps community use software, widgets, policies, practices, and knowledge effectively. This stems back to some community reports before Trusted CI's inception, where we asked the community what they wanted, and what we really heard from them is they wanted leadership and trusted and unbiased guidance in this. So I'm really proud of the impacts that Trusted CI has now had over its 7 years. We did an analysis report to both help summarize those and help steer our future to make sure we were hitting the NSF community broadly. And so I won't read through all the numbers up here, but very proud to have now be well over 200 projects impacted since our inception. And I'll walk through some of these outreach events by which this has taken place. So one of the ways that we're best known for engaging with the community is we have one-on-one collaborations that typically last 6 months. And we call these engagements, and we have a rolling application window that comes around twice per year. The next one will be this fall. And you can see a list here, well over a couple dozen projects that we've now engaged with one-on-one. And there's examples of what these engagements can take the form of. Some of them are very basic. It's a new project that's starting up, and they want help developing a cybersecurity program. Others are more mature, and they want us to assess it. We also do software assessments, code review type of things. We'll also look at features, and really any sort of challenge related to cybersecurity or privacy is in scope, and so can come to us for an application. We also have an annual summit that has traditionally been in Washington, D.C. We'll be moving out to the West Coast later this year in San Diego. And this is an opportunity. Over about 120 members of the community traditionally have gotten together. We'll have a call for participation coming out for papers, panels. We provide training along with other members of the community here. So it's an opportunity for the community to get together, learn about cybersecurity, share experiences, and really develop some of those informal networking contexts that are always so important, so you can have someone to reach out to. We also produce a lot of community-driven guidance that is freely available on our website. These are some examples here. We've got identity management. We've got risk assessment guidance, some operational cybersecurity, some best practices, some more specialized best practices for cloud providing organizations. So there's always something to peruse up there, and we're always adding to this library and updating it as it goes forward. One of the things we also do is measure longitudinally our impact on the community. So every 2 years, we do a survey of community members to ask them questions about the state of their cybersecurity program, their budgeting, do they have, what sort of staffing do they have in terms of cybersecurity? So it gives a way for us to measure, for you to go out and look and see how your project compares. So we've been doing this now for a couple years. We'll look for it again later this year, but this is an important part for us strategically to understand how the community is maturing. Very excited this year, we launched a new fellows program in Trusted CI. So we've got a half dozen folks pictured here on the screen, and you can find out more about them at the URL. So this is our effort to reach out and develop deeper connections with different science and research communities. And so these folks are right now being part of our virtual institute, where they're weekly webinar with us, and we're building connections with them. And we're really modeling this off of things that the UK Sustainability Institute with Neil Chu Hung, ACI REST Campus Champions have done. So very excited about this new program. Another new program in the last year was working with the cybersecurity research community and helping them get their cybersecurity research into practice. And so this means helping connect them with practitioners, both within the NSF community, folks that are running operational cybersecurity, as well as counterparts, CISOs and Chief Information Security Officers in higher ed, as well as commercial firms. And then we also connect with entrepreneurs and others, because for those of you who have engaged in this space, there's a long way to go from even a very successful piece of research to something you can run in a production environment is a big chasm to cross. And so our role is to help make those connections and foster that transition. And another piece, Susan mentioned the need for the research community to be able to clearly demonstrate that it has good cybersecurity value. The concern being is that we give the impression that our we don't have cybersecurity under control. Someone may come in and dictate something to us. So Trusted CI has recently started developing what we call the framework, which is a cybersecurity program specific for the open science research community. And so we're starting to develop this now. We've formed an advisory committee on this, and we'll be having drafts come out later this year. And welcome folks who might be interested in getting a little bit more deeply involved in that to send me an email and get connected. So I haven't listed all of our services here on these slides. You can find more of them on our website. Some of the URLs up here will give you, pointers to some of our other more popular services. And, down in the lower right, you'll find ways that you can keep up with us on, social media of your choice. And then we encourage people, please do send us if you have questions. You can send them, to me or that info@TrustedCI email address, and we will always do our best to answer it. Particularly if you're willing to let us, put an answer up on the blog so others can benefit from it. We, of course, can anonymize some of the details, but we're always looking to, what we find is if one person has a question, there's usually some more that have it as well. And so with that, I think that finishes my discussion on Trusted CI, and I'm going to turn it over to Susan now to cover the ResearchSOC.
Thanks, Vaughn. Jump into the next slide, please. Thanks. So ResearchSOC is the Research Security Operations Center, and next slide, I'll get into what that is. So ResearchSOC provides some operational services, building on technologies that exist, tying them together into a an operational program that'll help bolster all of these programs that really just need to not manage all of this internally. We've got some great partners: Indiana University, Duke University, UC San Diego, and Pittsburgh Supercomputing are working on this project. Slide. There we go. So ResearchSOC is really about operational services, and I'll break down what the components of those services are in a minute. But I want to talk about how we really tie this together. When we say a suite of technology, services, and trainings, we really do mean that we've tied this together into a cohesive whole. Each of our ResearchSOC clients gets a project liaison who helps guide them through the onboarding process, helps them with integration, ties them to resources relevant to each of the technologies that they decide they want to use, and will be there for the communication process as we go through. Slide. So OmniSOC is sort of the core of what most people think of when they think of a security operations center. These are the folks that are taking in the threat intelligence from our other components. They will notify members of science clients' incident response teams to help them kick off an incident response if something anomalous has been detected. They do the communication and information sharing, a lot of proactive threat hunting. They analyze the information that's coming through from monitoring systems and provide the call center services. They're located at IU and are, I don't know if they're part of the global NOC or if Don could probably explain it better than I could. Anyway, next slide. I got hung up on the logo. So out of 3 rocks at PSC, we're getting the vulnerability identification service. So this is something that is built on OpenVAS, which is an open source vulnerability scanning framework. And we can start with using Viz for those clients who sign up to make sure that we know what we're scanning. Look at the network architecture, make sure that what's on there is what we expect to be on there, and then do on-demand or continuous scanning to find machines that are not running what we think they're running, either services that are open or ports that are open that were unexpected, find applications that have known vulnerabilities because they haven't been updated, and other threats existing within the network so that you can use that home court advantage and the science project can update their infrastructure. Make sure that they have their patching under control, make sure that they close ports they're not using so that they're using that time to get it before an attacker finds it. Slide. Stinger. Stinger is really an automated system for deploying honeypots. For those of you who are not familiar with honeypots, a honeypot is a system that is made to be attacked. Too often, intrusions into networks, even supposedly highly monitored and highly secure networks like financial system networks, go undetected for months or even a year or more. And part of that reason is there are things in any network that can be difficult to monitor adequately, or it can be hard to tell some types of attack traffic from legitimate traffic and just tip over to the point where you know it's not a false positive, it's a real attack. Having honeypots deployed gives us data we wouldn't have had otherwise because there's no good reason to connect to one of these fake systems. This is a system that we set up that looks juicy for attackers, and once they connect, we know that something's going on. Additionally, honeypots are a great alternative for those embedded projects. We see a lot of science projects that are on a university campus and don't completely control their own networks. So while they may be able to send us some system logs, they can't just get us all of the routing information we might need to do the height of all the monitoring that OmniSOC is capable of. Putting some honeypots out there gets us a lot more data than we would have had otherwise about what's truly going on in those networks. Slide. ResearchSOC workshops are mainly geared toward either CISOs at schools that are going, or other organizations that have a lot of open research going on, so that they can find out what's on my network, what are the risks, what should I be concerned about, what should I be doing to support them, what should I be leaving them alone to do on their own. Also working with security architects and security professionals, whether those work for the science projects themselves or for the campuses. This is a really new but really promising program because it really brings together that connection that not all these research projects have with their parent organizations, and making sure that top to bottom things are being communicated well in terms of risk, and things are being worked together a little more reasonably. Because remember, a lot of the campuses live more in the traditional IT world that we talked about earlier, where they're concerned about confidentiality, they're concerned about traditional IT more than they are the weird one-off instruments and control systems. They're out there making sure student data doesn't get stolen. They're not really used to thinking about cybersecurity the way that research does. And we're hoping that these ResearchSOC workshops will help. Slide. The community of practice. So you'll get the URL for this a little later in the talk. This is the one part of the ResearchSOC that you do not need to sign up to be a ResearchSOC client to take advantage of. The community of practice is open for anyone who has an interest in learning more about practicing cybersecurity for scientific cyber infrastructure or any infrastructure that supports research. It's a little bit question and answer, a little bit of a discussion site, but we have security professionals from ResearchSOC who monitor this site regularly and participate in conversations. And most importantly, we have people from different scientific installations who participate here and are talking to each other. So if you're wondering, well, I'm sitting here in a large facility and I'm really wondering if anybody else has had this problem, this is a good place to ask. And it's just starting up. When you sign on there, you'll find out that just a few discussions have gotten kicked off. We just launched this in the past few weeks, and we're starting to build up momentum, but it's been a good experience so far, and I hope to see more people there. And again, this is the one that you get to take advantage of whether you sign on to ResearchSOC as a client ever or not. Slide. So threat intelligence. ResearchSOC gets its threat intelligence from a lot of different directions. This is something I love about ResearchSOC. We are not beholden to any one type of intelligence. We are willing to take it from everywhere, and we're integrating it to do the best that we can for our clients. This means OSINT, which is a term that feels weird to hackers because it stands for open source intelligence, which is a military term. It means intelligence that comes from public sources. It has nothing to do with open source software. ResearchSOC internal intelligence, this means things that we're learning from monitoring honeypots across all of our clients gets baked in. So when we start discovering working for one client that this specific type of attack sees these signifiers, we start searching for those signifiers across all of our clients. Being centralized in this way really gives us a chance to respond quickly and efficiently, more so than isolated security programs could if their monitoring were being done entirely in-house. For those of you who have control systems and these one-off devices to worry about, we are getting ICS and SCADA intel from ICS CERT, or the Information Control Systems Computer Emergency Response Center. We're looking at adding more ICS and SCADA intel sources in the future. We have the community of practice, which I just introduced, which is a great way to get not just the, hey, I saw this sort of attack or this sort of vulnerability intel, but a lot of the more strategic level information, as well as how much are you seeing of this type of problem or that type of problem. For those of you familiar with REN-ISAC, this is a resource that has previously been focused largely on the schools, but a REN-ISAC, it is Research and Education Networks ISAC, not just education networks. And there is a membership for REN-ISAC that comes with the package for our ResearchSOC clients for those who want it. And that comes with all of the REN-ISAC intel folded in, which becomes part of the ResearchSOC service offering. So that means that everything that comes through REN-ISAC is something that we know about and can help you respond to. Next slide. So as Vaughn mentioned, this is a really nascent project. It's been around nearly as long as Trusted CI. The project just kicked off in the past year, and we're in the process of developing our technologies and integrations, getting our contracts ready, doing a lot of outreach to InfoSec and to the researchers who we hope will benefit from what we're learning about cybersecurity. In addition to the fact that ResearchSOC is uniquely addressing the things that science need to keep working, such as our control systems, our telescopes, our other interesting instruments, we are also doing something, understanding that we are serving researchers. We also realize that those people are more motivated than most of the InfoSec world to make data available to people researching cybersecurity. So some of what ResearchSOC sees is going to feed into cybersecurity research and help make our capabilities better. Toward the end of this year and more into 2020, we're going to be starting our beta testing as we onboard clients. Our first 4 clients are listed here to the right: NRAO, Gemini Observatory, Gauge, and the Proteomics Lab. And then we're going to be moving to sustainability mode and for-fee services in end of 2020 and mostly 2021 and onward. So this is going to be something that your project or your facility can reach out and say, hey, we want to integrate this. Let's get the contracts going. Let's get a supplemental application into NSF and say, will they fund this resource for us? And we're happy to help you do that too. We realize the money has to come from somewhere. Slide. So this is kind of an interesting way to think about the stack. I've talked about a lot of different parts, but they all feed into one another. Deploying those sensors, honeypots, and getting feeds in means that the information feeds into the ResearchSOC and the lab for active response, correlation. Everything we do to get data feeds into the things that we can tell you and use to help you do information and help you do incident response. And we're doing active threat intelligence sharing. We're part of these communities nationally and internationally so that you get to benefit from what other institutions see without every science project trying to maintain relationships across 35 other institutions to get that intelligence. So all of these things feed into one another to create a pretty robust system for being aware of what's going on out in the world and in your environment so that you can make better risk decisions and so that you can make better decisions when it's time to do incident response. Slide. I talked about this a little bit at the beginning. This is a slide I added about making it personal. What I mean is we really try to customize this experience to the facilities and projects we're working with. Each client gets a project liaison who's there to coordinate your needs. We don't just plunk a product down on your desk and walk away after we get your money. This is an ongoing service that comes with training. It comes with integration support. And that project liaison isn't just there to onboard you. This project liaison is there to answer questions later down the road or help you out when we need to coordinate an incident response across multiple facilities. Projects can decide to engage with the full ResearchSOC offering, or you can pick specific solutions. We found that some of our smaller projects are really interested in the Stinger, the honeypots, the community of practice, and aren't really ready to onboard to all of the OmniSOC resources right off the gate, and that's just fine. We will come up with a way to shape this that works for your project. Slide. So this is my last slide on the ResearchSOC itself. I just wanted to make sure that everyone out there knows how to connect with us. That gives the URL for our website. It shows how to subscribe to our announcements mailing list. We have a blog that you're welcome to follow, and also please join that community of practice. We'd love to see more people asking questions, starting discussions, and bouncing things around. We really want this to become a thriving community. So I'll pause on this a moment if anyone wants to copy down any of those URLs, and the slides will be available after this talk. Slide. And then a quick wrap up. Actually, we're actually a little ahead of time than I thought, but talking about why scientific cyber infrastructure, cybersecurity challenges are so different. One of the biggest ones in my mind is always that one-off equipment and control systems. I know as we talked about creating ResearchSOC, a lot of people have asked me about the commercial SOCs that are out there, and they're great if you want to monitor a web server and an email server and some desktop systems. When you tell them, so about my drones and my telescopes and all all this other specialized equipment I have, they just don't know how to deal with you. And we really wanted something to be out there where science is looking after the assets that are most crucial to continuing the business of science. And that's very true for Trusted CI as well. Trusted CI has security people that are accustomed to dropping in and looking at these systems that are different than the standard enterprise IT and figuring out what needs to be done to address their needs. Science has different priorities than the industry standard ones. We are not confidentiality first. When we do have confidentiality concerns, they tend to be secondary to our concerns about integrity and reproducibility. We're very distributed and interconnected. Right now, I work with people from the UK, I work with people at CERN, I work with people across the US. I'm sure most of the people here are similar. We don't just work with people within our own organization. We don't just work with people who are local to us. We're very rapidly working with people at great distances, and that means that we're relying very heavily on cybersecurity to make sure that those connections keep working and keep working the way we need them to. And science has this weird thing. I put rapid pace in my slides, and I'm never really sure if I'm happy with how I phrased that. We tend to move very quickly, and we tend to pull along the things we've been doing because we got computing a lot earlier than a lot of other industries. So we have this mix of old and new infrastructure. Often when we're dealing with a science project, they have a cutting edge supercomputer that is the newest thing out. It is wonderful. And also they have some control systems that date back to the 1960s. And having this mix of old and new infrastructure in not just the same organization, but the same project is one of those challenges that is really unique to science. I only see it in a couple of the other environments that I work in. Slide. So just to recap, here's the slide you saw earlier on ResearchSOC and Trusted CI, the two organizations that Vaughn and I briefed about. ResearchSOC is really focused on operational services and making sure we're helping with monitoring, threat intelligence, coordinating incident response. Trusted CI is very focused on creating comprehensive cybersecurity programs and training and best practices and doing engagements with parts of the research community to help solve specific problems. So with the next slide, we'd like to thank you and take any questions.
All right, well, thank you both for that information. Really, really good stuff. So as a reminder to the audience, if you want to ask a question, just type it in the chat and we will replay it and ask Susan and Vaughn for a response. I have a couple that I sort of wrote down here, just because I'm always curious about these things. When is your next sort of training event going to be? And I don't know if I saw a calendar or anything like that that was posted, but are they sort of listed on your website?
Yeah, so I'll tackle that one, Jason. We will have a couple events coming up. We're going to have a workshop at PERC in Chicago in late July. For those of you who are going to be at PERC, look for a couple of events there. And then the summit that I mentioned in October, we'll have a full day of both full day and half day trainings. We usually have 4 or 5 tracks for a variety of different options there. And then the ResearchSOC is going to have another one of the series that Susan mentioned in November, coincidentally also in San Diego.
Okay. Apparently my audio is bad, so I'll try to speak into the microphone a little bit better. So hitting on some of the things from the latter half of the talk there, where you're talking about working with scientific communities. I mean, not to put you too much on the spot, but do you have sort of an example of any really, really challenging use cases that you guys needed to work with that required a little bit more additional thought? Or do a lot of the efforts that you've done sort of, not to say cookie cutter, but they sort of look the same in terms of the process that you need to go through and sort of the items that you need to secure and the things that you need to bring to the attention of the various people involved?
Yeah, so Jason, yeah, your audio is pretty bad. What I understood is you were asking for an example of a particularly challenging thing that we've taken on, and I think I'll throw one of them out there, which is we worked with the U.S. Antarctic program that the National Science Foundation runs. So this is a group, they run the camp actually down in the Antarctic and have a series of different scientific research projects come in really throughout the Antarctic summer to spend time down there. And so we worked with them to really help them with their onboarding and offboarding projects for these different science projects in the Antarctic. And challenging environment there. I mean, just to give you an example, right? One of the challenges they face, somebody fires up Netflix, and it can easily consume, a large fraction of the bandwidth that they have available. So a very different environment, obviously, besides the temperatures and the IT infrastructure down there. I do note a couple questions in the chat that look like they may be well aimed for Susan.
Yeah, given that I sound like a Dr. Whoville and I may not be able to repeat them, so Vaughn, if you'd like to read them out, Susan can answer.
Yeah, I'll do that, Jason. So Susan, a question here. I would like to understand the data workflow. As a client, do I need to send logs, host/network to a central ResearchSOC instance, or do I install a ResearchSOC interest on-prem that would receive threat intelligence from a central location?
So we're still working out the amount of options we'll have available for clients because we're trying very hard to handle the variety of network architectures we're running into for both the independent and the embedded clients. Getting things sent out to OmniSOC is sort of the ideal, and we've been able to take in a lot of different types of data based on whether you already have a SIEM or security events and information management host available, if you've already built that in. If you're just doing network logging and system logging independently and you need to feed us those as independent feeds, we have ways to do all of that. And of course, the Stinger system is pretty much getting integrated now so that it can send us what it needs to send us. There isn't a ResearchSOC instance to install on-prem, but we've looked at maybe in the future setting up some kind of appliance install to make it easier for smaller projects to get up and running. That's a potential future roadmap plan that's not available now. But we're happy to do integration help if someone doesn't have logging capability now and needs to figure out how to feed us the data streams that we need to do our work.
And two more questions here related to the ResearchSOC, Susan, and they're related questions, so I'm going to ask them one right after the other. The ResearchSOC will subscribe to a number of sources of threat intelligence. A lot of it will likely come from the community. Is there any mechanism planned to share that back to the community based on the attacks events managed by the ResearchSOC? And the second question was asking specifically about using a tool like MISP to do so, MISP.
Okay. So right now we haven't settled on a method of sharing, so it might end up being MISP, it might end up being something else entirely. We've been talking about what level of sharing is appropriate because some of the intelligence we take in, for example, the REN-ISAC intelligence, has contractual limits on who we're allowed to share it with. So we can't just reshare that with a broad swath of the community. The things that we take in that are open source intelligence, we tend to redirect people back to the original sources we got it from. Because if it's open, it's better for people to select what they want to get from the source rather than just get a fire hose from us. As to intelligence that's generated within our community, we already have a commitment from our clients to share that information for cybersecurity research purposes, and we're going to see some of that come out for the benefit of the community in papers, in announcements, and through participation in the community of practice. As far as producing data feeds for the wider community, it's under discussion, but we're not sure how useful that's going to be at this point because what we've found is a lot of our community that don't have these monitoring systems up can't take in something like MISP yet anyway. That's why very little of our community has been onboarded to something like REN-ISAC, for example. They're just not prepared to take that data in and act on it without an intermediary. So we're trying to figure out what's the most useful thing we can do. I'm sorry I don't have a more concrete answer for you. We're trying to kind of figure out what's in most demand by the community and what we can do while giving the best service to our clients.
Another ResearchSOC question for you, Susan. Is ResearchSOC suitable for regulated data environments?
At this point, it depends a lot on what regulation you're under. I would not, for example, drop us into the middle of something where you have classified data. And that is because we very explicitly share some of the data that we learn with researchers, and that is not in keeping with classified data regulations. We can help with, I think I see something in the chat about 800-171. So if you're just talking about really basic stuff, we're not talking about classified data, I'm probably going to have you sit down with my brilliant compliance guy and see if you think he thinks it's a fit, because I'll tell you something and it may or may not be correct, but Anurag will know for sure.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that, Susan. Anurag did do an analysis of ResearchSOC, and I forget the exact number, but it was he thought it fit. It would satisfy a significant number of the 800-171 requirements. So not all, and not I don't even think a majority, but a significant number.
Right.
20% is what Todd is telling me.
Excellent. And I know that I know there's different reasons people can become subject to 800-171. So I don't know if that's all 800-171 applications, CUI in specific, or because there are a lot of different regulations that can push you into 800-171 territory. And that's where I tend to call Anurag, because I don't know all of the details.
I think we've worked through all the questions in the chat room. I'll give folks just a second here, see if they have any more. See if Jason's been unassimilated by the board.
Yeah, well, I'll say something. Do I sound better or no?
No.
No, you
Okay,
sound.
Well, we may just have to let me be boardy then. So thank you both for talk today. I'll get this posted, and we do not have a call next week, everybody, but I'll send out an announcement. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you all, and thank you again, Jason, for the invitation.
Yes, thank you for having us.